My sister mocked me for asking $100, then I withdrew $5.8 million. The bank froze. She dropped to her knees. My name is Emily and I am 23 years old. I never imagined $100 could destroy years of family closeness. I thought I was asking for help, just a small favor between sisters. But instead of kindness, I got mockery. I stood there, awkward and humiliated, holding back tears as my sister laughed at me in front of her friends, joking that I must be broke and desperate if I needed to borrow such a tiny amount. I had only asked for it to cover a surprise utility bill that hit just as my paycheck was delayed. She could have just said no quietly. But instead, she leaned back on her designer couch, wine glass in hand, and announced to everyone that I was still the poor one in the family. The one who always needed saving. I left without saying a word. But inside, something broke, and something else woke up. For most of my life, I played the role of the quiet sister. The sensible one. I was never flashy, never loud, never the center of attention. That had always been my sister, Amber. She was the golden girl. The one with the looks, the charm, the social life. She dated popular guys, wore expensive clothes, and somehow always had money, even when she didn't have a steady job. People were drawn to her. My parents doted on her. Even strangers seemed to offer her things without her asking. I didn't mind being in the background. I thought we balanced each other out. I worked hard in school, kept my head down, and did everything by the book. I got good grades, worked 2 jobs during college, and never asked for much. But that night after she laughed at me for needing $100, I started thinking differently. It wasn't the money. It was the way she looked at me, like I was beneath her. Like I'd never be anything more than her boring, struggling little sister. That night, sitting alone on my bed in my small 1-bedroom apartment, I stared at my phone. I had exactly $347 in my checking account, rent was due in 5 days, and my job at the call center had just cut everyone's hours. I was exhausted. I was tired of being overlooked, underestimated, pitted. Something inside me shifted. I remembered something I'd almost forgotten. A message that had come a few weeks earlier from someone I barely knew, a man named Elliot I'd met at a tech networking event I had almost skipped. He said he'd seen my coding portfolio online and was looking for someone to help him with a back-end system for a confidential project. He mentioned blockchain, high-security infrastructure, and something about anonymized digital assets. I hadn't replied then. I assumed it was another long-shot opportunity that would go nowhere. But now, with nothing to lose, I found myself opening that message. I wrote him back. Within 10 minutes, he replied. Within a week, I had signed an NDA and was working with him and a small, extremely private team of developers and analysts on what he called the most disruptive financial tool of the next decade. I didn't know all the details then. I was assigned to a very specific, very technical role, building secure smart contracts and internal tracking architecture. I worked nights, early mornings, weekends. It paid more than I'd ever made before. But even more than the money, it gave me something else: purpose, potential, and power. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not even my best friend. Especially not Amber. She wouldn't have understood. She would have laughed it off as one of my weird projects. But it wasn't a weird project. It was real. Real enough that just 3 months in, Elliot wired me a bonus. A 6-figure bonus. More money than I had made in 3 years combined. I stared at the number in my account, my hands shaking. Then I moved most of it out of my main account, spread it across 3 investment wallets, and kept only what I needed to live. My life didn't change overnight. I didn't buy a new car or move into a fancy place. I didn't post anything online. I just kept building, learning, working. Quietly. Steadily. Meanwhile, Amber kept living her Instagram perfect life, still inviting me to things only to subtly insult me in front of her friends. I stopped going. I thought she'd notice. She didn't. Or if she did, she didn't care. That's when I stopped caring too. Not out of anger, but clarity. I knew what she thought of me. And I knew something she didn't. I wasn't just helping to build a project. I was becoming part of something massive. The more I learned about what Elliot's team was creating, the more I realized how revolutionary it was. They were building a new kind of secure banking platform, something that bypassed traditional systems, something that, if successful, could turn early contributors into millionaires. By the 6th month, the project went into stealth pre-launch. We were given anonymous digital asset shares as part of our compensation. Mine? Valued at nearly $1.2 million. That's when I moved into the second phase of my plan. I opened a holding account under an alias trust. I transferred the shares. I hired a tax strategist anonymously. And I began preparing for the full launch, an event that would change my life forever. But through it all, I stayed silent. No showy posts, no flashy purchases. I didn't want to just rise, I wanted to rise in silence. But I was keeping track. Watching. Listening. Then one day, out of nowhere, Amber called. Not to apologize. Not to check in. But to complain. She was frustrated about an influencer brand deal falling through and asked if I had any old cameras she could borrow for a shoot. I told her I'd drop something off the next day. I arrived with a used DSLR I still had from college and placed it on her kitchen counter. She barely said thanks. She was too busy talking about a new guy she was dating, some startup founder she thought could get her out of the stuck phase. I nodded, smiled, and left. I didn't tell her that I was already working with venture capitalists. That I had just filed to register a company in Delaware under my name. That my digital assets were now worth over $5 million. 2 weeks later, the project went public. Overnight, our platform was splashed across tech blogs, finance magazines, and even the evening news. Early contributors, like me, were now multimillionaires. The tokens I held multiplied in value. My shares were worth over $5.8 million. The next morning, I walked into my local bank and requested a transfer from my holding account. The teller's eyes widened, then widened more. 10 minutes later, the manager emerged and told me the bank had to verify the legitimacy of the account. I nodded calmly and gave them the legal documentation. I didn't panic. I knew the drill. I left without incident. But someone else found out. Somehow, likely through a friend, word reached Amber. She called me that night. For the first time in years, her voice was small. Cautious. Curious. She asked me if I was really involved in that crypto bank thing people were talking about. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I said I had been doing some tech work. She asked if I had actually made money. I asked why it mattered. She hesitated, then said she was behind on rent. She needed help. Just a bit. Maybe $200 to get her through the weekend. My heart should have softened, but instead, it hardened. I hadn't forgotten the night she laughed at me for needing less than that. I told her I'd think about it and hung up. The next morning, I walked into a different bank and requested the same transfer. This time, it went through. Slowly. Carefully. And officially. The funds were moved. A banker who had barely looked at me before now smiled and offered me bottled water while the process finalized. When I got home, I found 20 missed messages from Amber. 2 voicemails. A desperate text. She said her landlord was threatening eviction. That she didn't know where else to turn. That she was scared. I waited before replying. Then I told her to meet me at the bank the next day. What happened next was the moment everything changed. The moment the power shifted. The moment my sister, the one who had always held herself above me, saw the truth with her own eyes. Not because I wanted revenge. But because some lessons must be learned face to face. And some debts aren't paid in dollars, but in humility. And I was ready. The next morning, I arrived at the bank early. I chose one of the upscale branches with glossy floors, hushed voices, and private rooms for high net worth clients. I was no longer someone who stood in line with a paper check and nervous hands. Today, I had an appointment. I wore simple clothes, neutral slacks, a tailored blouse, but my posture had changed. I carried myself like someone who knew her worth. The manager who greeted me had already seen the wire confirmation and escorted me to a private office, offering coffee and fruit water. I declined politely. I didn't need comfort. I needed clarity. Then I waited. Amber arrived exactly 13 minutes late. I watched her through the frosted glass, her heels clicking across the tile like she owned the place. She was dressed for drama, long coat, oversized sunglasses, perfectly curled hair. When the assistant let her in, she took them off slowly, looking around as if the office should impress her. Then her eyes landed on me. For a second, confusion flickered across her face. Like she wasn't sure if this was real. I gestured for her to sit. She did, crossing her legs and flipping her hair back. I started by asking what she needed the money for. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted her to say it. She gave a speech about overdue rent, missed brand deals, and a landlord threatening to change the locks. She said she hated asking for help, especially from me, but things were really tough. She said she was sorry for being rude that night I asked for $100. That she was just stressed, and she didn't mean it. Her voice cracked slightly. I believed some of it. But not all. Because I had seen this version of Amber before, the one who cried when things didn't go her way. The one who apologized not from understanding, but desperation. I nodded slowly. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a cashier's check. She leaned forward like a starving person spotting a crumb. Her eyes widened. But before she could touch it, I pulled it back. I told her it was for $10,000. Not because I owed her. Not because she earned it. But because I wanted to give her a choice. She could take the check and agree to a single condition: she would never ask me for money again. Not ever. Not even $1. In return, I would expect nothing from her. No apologies, no relationship. Just clean separation. A business deal. She blinked. Then smiled tightly. Only $10,000, she asked. The air left the room. That one sentence pulled the weight of years behind it. She still didn't get it. I folded the check and slid it back into my bag. Then I stood. She realized then. Her face fell, and she stood too, grabbing my arm. She said she was sorry again, but this time with panic. She said she didn't mean it like that. She begged me to sit back down. I did, but only because I had something else to say. I opened the banking app on my phone and showed her the screen. The number glowed: $5,817,304.87. Her mouth fell open. I watched as her knees wobbled slightly. She sat down without me asking. She asked if it was real. I told her yes. She asked how. I told her it didn't matter now. She asked if I would invest in her personal brand. I laughed. I couldn't help it. Then I told her something I hadn't told anyone yet, not even Elliot. I had filed paperwork to launch my own tech company. The name was mine, the IP was mine, and the roadmap was mine. And I was hiring. Not influencers. Not pretty faces. But people who had ideas, grit, and humility. She looked down, cheeks flushed. She said she didn't know I had it in me. I said I always did. She just never looked hard enough. Then came the moment I hadn't expected. She started to cry. Real tears, silent ones. She said she didn't recognize me anymore. That I had become someone else. Someone intimidating. I sat back and let the silence stretch between us. I wasn't trying to intimidate anyone. I had just stopped apologizing for growing. Then, in a moment I will never forget, she got on her knees. Right there in the bank office. She held my hand and said she was sorry. She begged me not to abandon her. She said she didn't care about the money, she just didn't want to lose me. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to take that moment as the twist where everything healed. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. I let her sit in the weight of it all. Then I stood, gently pulled her up, and told her something she'd never heard from me before: I would always care about her. But I would never again carry her. She tried to follow me out of the bank, but I stopped her at the door. I told her I needed space. That maybe, in time, we could talk. But only when she could see me as an equal, not a bank account or a backup plan. I left her there, stunned and quiet, for once not in control of the room. That night, I didn't go home. I drove 2 hours up the coast to a quiet hotel I used to dream about when I had no money. I checked into a suite with ocean views and stood on the balcony watching the waves crash below. I ordered dinner, turned off my phone, and for the first time in years, I slept without grinding my teeth. The next few days were filled with changes. Elliot reached out with an offer to partner on a new project, this time with me as co-founder. I accepted. We began drafting contracts immediately. I hired a small team of developers, all women, all brilliant, and all people who had been underestimated, just like me. My company wasn't just about tech. It was about power in quiet hands. Amber didn't call again for weeks. Then one day, I received a package. Inside was a framed photo of us as kids, and a note. She wrote that she was sorry, not for what she'd said, but for not seeing who I really was. She said she was starting a job at a digital agency. Entry level. She said it was humbling, but necessary. I believed her. For the first time, I truly did. I didn't reply. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Forgiveness wasn't a door I could walk through all at once. But I placed the photo on a shelf in my office. Not to remember the pain, but to honor the journey. And I moved forward. Not with revenge, not with arrogance, but with purpose. The money was never the real win. The real win was finally standing in the full truth of who I was. And making sure that next time someone laughed at me, I would already be too far ahead to hear it. 3 weeks passed, and I hadn't heard from Amber. I didn't expect to. After the last encounter at the bank, I figured she'd either shut me out forever or retreat to regroup. She wasn't used to being the one out of the loop, off balance. But the silence didn't give me peace. It gave me suspicion. My instincts were rarely loud, but they were rarely wrong. Something felt off. Then the email came. It was from a reporter. He claimed to be writing a story about the rise of female tech entrepreneurs in the crypto world and wanted to profile me. He mentioned my company name, my legal filings, and, most unsettling of all, my bank transaction from the week before. It wasn't public knowledge. Not yet. I'd taken careful steps to keep my business quiet until I was ready to launch with full control of the narrative. I never replied. But I forwarded the email to Elliot. An hour later, he called. His voice, normally calm and precise, was clipped and tense. He said this reporter had contacted 2 other developers on our team, asking questions that seemed too specific, too targeted. Then came the question neither of us wanted to ask out loud: had someone close to us leaked the information? I didn't want to believe it, but I already knew. Only a handful of people even knew I was working on anything, let alone involved in anything big. One of them had been sitting across from me in a private bank room, crying real tears. My stomach sank. I checked Amber's social media. Her pages had been wiped clean. No brand promotions, no quotes, no lifestyle reels. Just a new bio that read building something new. Stay tuned. A link below led to a sleek landing page with her name in bold, claiming she was the founder of an empowerment finance platform for women. I stared at the screen. My mouth went dry. The colors, the buzzwords, even the placeholder language, most of it echoed phrases I'd used in my private investor decks. There was no mention of me, of course. Just her. A founder. A visionary. A woman in fintech. The fury came in a slow wave. Not hot, not chaotic. Cold. Clean. Focused. I didn't call her. I didn't write. I documented everything. Screenshots, timestamps, email headers. Then I reached out to my lawyer. The same one who had helped me establish my trust accounts and incorporation. She read through the materials, asked a few measured questions, and then gave me a one-word answer: proceed. Within 72 hours, we filed a cease and desist letter citing intellectual property theft, brand impersonation, and misuse of confidential data. The documents were delivered directly to Amber's temporary office, a co-working space downtown. I didn't need to show up. The law spoke for me now. But Amber didn't stay silent. She responded the only way she knew how, by going louder. She posted a video on a Fresh Platform account, tears in her eyes, saying her own sister was trying to ruin her success. That I was jealous. That I never supported her dreams. The comments came pouring in. Most were supportive. Some turned angry. A few tagged me directly, accusing me of bullying her, of keeping real women down. She knew how to weaponize attention. It was her gift. But she had underestimated one thing: I wasn't playing her game anymore. I didn't need sympathy. I needed facts. And I had them. Within a week, my lawyer filed an injunction and our PR team released a carefully worded statement. Not messy, not emotional. Just truth. It clarified my role in the original project, provided public blockchain records of my digital asset creation, and made it clear that legal action was ongoing. I thought that would be enough. But then came the twist I didn't see coming. A venture capital firm I'd been speaking with for weeks suddenly went dark. No emails. No callbacks. When I finally got someone on the phone, they hesitated, then admitted they'd heard concerns about the ownership of my idea. Someone had reached out anonymously with claims that I had copied Amber's new platform. The absurdity of it hit like a slap. She was flipping the story. Using my silence as a weapon. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by papers, screenshots, emails. I had worked too hard to be undone by someone else's performance. That's when I made a decision. I would stop hiding. I would tell my story, but in my words, on my terms. The next morning, I sat down with a journalist from a respected business publication. I gave them everything: details, documents, timelines. Not with bitterness, but with precision. I wasn't there to shame Amber. I was there to set the record straight. The story ran 2 days later. The headline was clean and quiet: from silence to startup, the woman behind one of the year's most powerful financial tools. It was factual, not flashy. But it hit hard. The fallout was swift. The firm that ghosted me called to apologize. 3 other investors reached out. The platform Amber had launched disappeared within days. Her hosting company received a takedown notice. She went offline. No posts, no videos, no statements. Just silence. And then came the final message. Not public. Just a simple text. You win. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I had survived something I never should have had to fight in the first place. I didn't reply. But later that night, as I watched the city lights from my new office window, I realized something else. This wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming. Reclaiming the space I had always made myself small in. Reclaiming my time, my work, my identity. I would always love Amber, in the complicated way we love people who've hurt us deeply. But I would never again make myself small to keep her comfortable. That part of me was gone. Burned away. replaced with something steadier. I turned back to my desk and pulled out the next draft of the investor pitch. There were still meetings to prepare for, products to refine, a company to lead. This was only the beginning. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being seen. I was ready. Weeks passed after Amber's last message. "You win." "I'm sorry." I didn't answer, and she didn't follow up. The silence between us was no longer brittle, it was heavy, unspoken, and full of things neither of us was ready to say out loud. Still, the tension lingered like a thin layer of dust on everything I touched. I should have felt free. I should have felt vindicated. But part of me kept glancing over my shoulder, waiting for the next twist. I wasn't wrong to. The morning it all shifted again started like any other. I was in a virtual meeting with my development team, finalizing testing on a beta feature for our new Secure Pay API. One of the newer interns interrupted mid-call, voice jittery, saying someone had tried to breach one of our test wallets. They hadn't succeeded, but the attempt had come from a familiar IP. Too familiar. I froze as he recited the string of digits. It matched the one tied to an old laptop, Amber's laptop. I'd helped her set it up 2 years ago, back when she still trusted me with her passwords. The system logs didn't lie. She had tried to access a sandbox environment, likely not understanding that even the test version of our code was locked down tighter than a vault. But that wasn't the most dangerous part. The attempt triggered a backup protocol that flagged her IP on multiple platforms connected to our ecosystem. Elliot called almost immediately after I flagged it. He was livid, not at me, but at the recklessness of it all. If the story leaked, that someone with my surname had tried to access protected property, it wouldn't just be bad optics. It could compromise investor confidence. And in the startup world, confidence was currency. I hung up and stared at my screen. This wasn't a mistake. This was a move. A quiet, desperate one. I debated what to do: go silent, confront her, escalate again? But the answer came when my lawyer messaged, a cease and desist wasn't enough anymore. We had to decide whether to press formal charges. That night, I drove without a destination. The city blurred past, headlights smearing across my windshield. I pulled into an empty overlook, got out, and sat on the hood of my car. The air was cold. Too quiet. I thought about what it would mean to press charges against my sister. I thought about what we used to be, what we were before life turned us into opponents. Then I remembered the laughter in her voice the day she mocked me for needing $100. And the hunger in her eyes when she saw my bank balance. She didn't want help. She wanted control. Back at my apartment, I drafted a statement. Not for court, not for the press, for myself. A clear record of boundaries. The next morning, I emailed it to my legal team with one word: proceed. The news hit a few days later. A leak from the district clerk's office made it public before we had a chance to control the narrative. Tech CEO files cybersecurity complaint against own sister. The press spun it hard. My inbox exploded. Some praised me for standing up. Others called me heartless. Amber went quiet again. Too quiet. But then she resurfaced with the most unexpected twist of all. I was at the office when a receptionist called up and said someone was downstairs to see me. Not on the calendar. No appointment. Just a woman who said she wouldn't leave unless I came down. I knew who it was. I took the elevator down slowly. My stomach turned with every floor. When I reached the lobby, she was standing in the corner, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, no makeup, no flash. Her eyes were red. She didn't speak right away. Just looked at me like she didn't recognize the person walking toward her. I didn't offer a hug. I didn't fake warmth. I simply asked what she was doing there. She said she was dropping something off. Then she handed me a small brown envelope. Inside were 2 things: an apology letter, handwritten in uneven ink, and a worn-out USB drive. She said it held everything she had taken, copies of documents, investor slides, even mock-ups she had passed off as her own. She said she was turning it over voluntarily. Not because she was being forced, but because she had finally realized what she'd become. I didn't know what to say. I still didn't trust it. Then she said she was leaving the city. That she needed to start over, far away from all of it. She didn't ask me to drop the complaint. She didn't beg. She just said she'd understand if I didn't forgive her. I nodded. She left. I stood there a long time, gripping the envelope. Later, I ran the USB through a secured reader. It checked out. She had, in fact, turned everything over. My lawyer was shocked. Elliot didn't believe it. But I did, because I could see the difference in her eyes that morning. There was no hunger left. Just loss. Still, I didn't pull the complaint right away. I let the process continue, slow and deliberate. Not for revenge, but for closure. The platform launched officially 2 months later. The beta testers were glowing with reviews. Investors doubled down. Media outlets wrote stories about the quiet strength behind the brand. And someone once laughed at for needing $100, was now the founder and CEO of one of the fastest growing fintech startups on the West Coast. And yet, I still thought about her. Amber sent one final letter, not to beg, not to explain. Just to say she was in a new town, working a regular job, trying to be better. She ended with a line that stuck with me longer than I expected. Sometimes falling all the way down is the only way we finally learn how to stand up. I still hadn't decided whether I'd forgive her. But I knew one thing, I no longer needed her apology to move forward. I had already built something bigger than her judgment, stronger than her sabotage. And I was just getting started. Time passed like ripples, quiet at first, then spreading outward in ways I didn't expect. The company continued to grow. Our platform stabilized. A partnership with a major payment processor was finalized, and suddenly we weren't just promising a revolution in secure transactions, we were delivering it. Users trusted us. Investors stayed loyal. My team, once tiny and hidden behind code, stood proud at industry panels and innovation showcases. There were awards, interviews, podcast invites. But I declined most of them. I had learned that power, real power, often works best in silence. I kept working. Not because I needed to anymore, but because I wanted to. I wanted to create something that would outlast trends, survive criticism, and function without needing constant justification. Every morning I woke up in a space that I owned, emotionally and physically. The walls didn't remind me of old arguments. The furniture didn't echo anyone's laughter but mine. And my mirror didn't show a girl trying to keep up anymore. It showed a woman who'd stopped chasing and started choosing. Then, one rainy evening, something arrived that cracked the surface again. A package. No name. No return address. Just a sleek white envelope with a gold emblem I recognized immediately, my grandmother's initials, embossed on stationery she used when we were children. I hadn't seen it in years. I opened it carefully, and out slid a letter and a folded photograph. The letter was short. Amber had found it while cleaning out an old storage unit she'd forgotten she had. Inside were things from our childhood, school awards, scribbled drawings, old VHS tapes, and this photo. One of us at the community pool, grinning with popsicles, sunburnt shoulders pressed together, no bitterness between us yet. Before life turned into a competition. Before we learned to measure each other's worth in silence and side eyes. Before everything cracked. The note simply read, I forgot we were ever this close. I'm sorry it took losing everything to remember. I stared at that photo for a long time. Not because I missed the version of her that posed beside me. But because I missed the version of me who didn't yet know how sharp love could become when it's tangled with pride. I put the letter away. But the photo stayed on my desk for weeks. Around that same time, something else shifted, this time in Kyle, my CTO and close friend, who had been with me since the beginning. He called one night to say we'd been shortlisted for an international fintech competition. The prize? A funding round from a global firm and a speaking slot that would put us in front of the biggest names in tech. There was just one catch. The pitch had to be made in person. And not by him. By me. I hesitated. It meant exposure. Cameras. The spotlight I'd spent most of my life trying to avoid. The woman who was mocked for needing $100 would now stand before billionaires asking for millions, not for survival, but for expansion. It scared me more than I cared to admit. I told Kyle I'd think about it. I didn't sleep much that night. But the next morning, I woke up with a quiet answer. I was ready. Not because the past was fixed. But because I had outgrown the part of me that thought hiding was the same thing as healing. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of that audience. The lights were bright. The room was cold. But my voice was steady. I told them not just about our tech, but about the woman behind it. I spoke of the night I sat alone in my apartment with $347 in my bank account. I didn't name Amber. I didn't need to. I told them about boundaries, about betrayal, about building something not to prove anyone wrong, but to prove myself right. When I finished, the room was silent for a beat. Then came applause. Not polite. Not distracted. But real. We won the competition. The funding deal closed within 48 hours. And just like that, the company grew again, faster, stronger, wider. But the biggest change came weeks later, at a conference in Chicago. I was sitting at a cafe inside the venue, preparing for a roundtable session, when a woman approached my table slowly, nervously. She wore a blazer too big for her frame, no makeup, hair pulled back. It took me a second to realize it was Amber. She asked if she could sit. I nodded. She didn't waste time. She said she wasn't there for money or favors. She said she'd found work at a nonprofit helping women transition out of financial abuse. She said she didn't talk about me, not anymore. Not online. Not to others. Because she realized she hadn't earned that right. Then she pulled out something small. A necklace. It was a tiny charm we'd both had as kids, shaped like half a heart. Hers said best. Mine had once said friends. She had found hers in the bottom of an old box. She handed it to me and said if I didn't want it, that was okay. But she thought I should have it. I didn't take it. Not at first. I just stared at it. Then I looked at her. Really looked. And I saw it. Not manipulation. Not hunger. Just the quiet exhaustion of someone who finally stopped running. I took the charm and said thank you. That's all. She nodded, stood up, and left. No promises. No forced closeness. Just closure. That night, I went back to my hotel room and opened the balcony door to let in the city noise. I held the tiny charm in my palm and remembered what it once meant to us before the world taught us to compete. Before pride blurred the lines between strength and cruelty. I didn't hang the charm on my keychain. I didn't put it on a necklace. I slid it into a drawer where I kept my personal reminders, notes, photos, ticket stubs from moments that shaped me. It belonged there now. Not as a symbol of what was lost, but of what survived. And I moved forward. The company scaled. We launched in 3 more countries. I brought on new women leaders who reminded me of the version of me that once whispered ideas into a cracked laptop screen, praying someone would listen. Now I was the one listening. Creating space. Protecting it. Sometimes I still hear her voice, faintly, in my memory, the old Amber laughing, saying I couldn't possibly be serious for needing help. That version of her isn't gone. But she no longer controls the story. Not hers. Not mine. I was mocked for needing $100. Then I built something worth millions. And along the way, I learned something more valuable than any transfer or token. That wealth isn't just what's in your account. It's what you refuse to let others take from your spirit. And I'm never going back.